Kelly Free was raised to believe that good and bad things happened three at a time. If a bad thing happened, another soon followed, and then a third. If a fourth thing happened in a short period of time, two more soon followed. Good things rarely happened in threes, but old wives' tales are just old wives' tales. Kelly believed in the theory of three for bad things. The first bad thing happened late one night. He worked for a property management company in a fairly large community in Missouri. He had worked there even before he met his fiancée, CEE of 6 years, the former Megan Flowers. He was successfully sourcing commercial real estate for various purposes and earning good commissions. However, his boss, Jerry Myers, always disapproved of Kelly's views on his personal lifestyle. While other members of the sales and consulting team lived well off their commissions, Kelly saved most of his commissions and lived paycheck to paycheck. Other team members drove Mercedes and Lexus cars and SUVs. Kelly drove a 10-year-old pickup truck. All the other team members lived in gated communities and million-dollar homes, and Kelly and Megan lived in a nice 2-story, 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood in the city. Most of the team members belonged to local country clubs, but Kelly belonged to the local YMCA and worked out there. Every performance review Jerry did on Kelly ended with the comment that Kelly needed to get with the program and live like his peers. Kelly would lean back and just smile at Jerry. He nodded, said he would do a better job, and then went back to his lifestyle. He had plans for retirement and wanted to maximize his money for it. On this fateful Friday, Jerry was on edge. He took turns calling all of the sales staff into his office. Soon, rumors were flying around the office. With the recent economic downturn, businesses were not looking to expand and were laying off workers. This gave Property Management Services sales department less work. When it was Kelly's turn to come into the office, Jerry was brief and few words. "I have a tough decision to make. We have to cut costs, and right now, I have to lay off some of the office staff and some of the sales department. Right now, the most money will come from the rental properties we manage, and you and the rest of the sales staff have nothing to do with that line of business. Tell me why I should keep you and not the rest of the team?" Kelly pointed to his success in finding properties for specialized purposes and the fact that he was still turning a profit in the early days of the recession. Jerry recognized his contributions, but noted that Kelly's savings might last longer during a period of high unemployment than his colleagues who had fewer savings. Kelly sat in utter amazement. "Since I'm saving money by not spending it on the latest and greatest gadgets, houses and cars, I should be let go. But not others who will lose their toys regardless of whether they stay employed because their commissions will be less? Are you serious?" Jerry began to blush profusely. He was at least 100 pounds overweight, and there were rumors that he refused to take his high blood pressure medication. He looked like he might have a stroke at any minute. "Damn it, I've told you to live up to the paycheck you get. You're embarrassing yourself when we go to make a deal. You don't impress those people from the big corporations we work with when they come to town to make a deal. You look and dress like a small-town hick from a small town, not a person of their caliber. It's a wonder we don't lose sales because of you, instead of making deals on the properties you find." He wiped the saliva from his mouth and continued. "I have feelings for all of you, and I hate having to fire someone, but driving someone into bankruptcy while you can afford to be out of work for a while is something I can't do. Clean up your desk." Kelly stood up to his full height, as tall as his 5'9" allowed. His parents had always preached frugality, and now it would pay off in the long run. In 8 years of savings and dividends from investments, he had nearly $3 million accumulated, while most of his peers had only a few thousand. He didn't really need to work again if he didn't want to. He just loved his job of finding real estate for companies, regardless of where he had to travel to do it. He was used to big corporations coming in and asking him to do the impossible, which was to find great real estate for the least amount of money. As he left, he didn't even say goodbye to Jerry. He went straight to his cubicle and started putting things in order. There weren't many of his personal belongings in there. The computer belonged to the company. He smiled to himself as he thought about the job he was leaving behind. He logged in and saved his latest proposal for a large transportation company on his personal drive and then deleted all evidence of it. Jerry didn't know that the transportation company had approached him personally about finding land for a new distribution center. He would have brought the offer directly to Jerry before closing the deal, which he had been doing more and more lately as his name was becoming known around the country as the man to go to for real estate. He didn't do anything vindictive, such as erasing all his other work. Others might have done so, but he was above that. Soon he packed up and was out the door. None of his coworkers even looked at him as he left. Well, he thought, I've always been an outsider. He wished them well, but felt that the company would not survive if this economic situation continued for long. He threw his stuff in the back seat of his trusty old pickup truck and headed home. He needed to meet with Megan and discuss what they would do to generate income. He didn't want to make any savings until it was necessary. As he drove, he ran through a list of positives and negatives in his head. The positives included the low payment on the house, since they had bought it when interest rates were near their lowest in recent history. If necessary, he could forgo the YMCA membership and just jog to keep himself in shape. For the rest of his workouts, a cheap set of weights sufficed. Kelly was already mowing his yard and tending to the landscaping. He resisted Megan's desire for a pond in the backyard and all the extra work and expense it would entail. But he also did most of the grocery shopping and took care of the house, allowing Megan to focus on her work and career. He believed this was what the modern woman wanted to see in her man: help around the house and no definition of male and female roles in their relationship. It was time-consuming, but Megan always appreciated his efforts to help. Megan had a good job at a local print shop. The likelihood of her getting fired was slim. She could jog with him to stay in shape. They hadn't decided to start a family yet, so insurance needs were minimal. It was actually a good time to get pregnant, if only from the standpoint that while he was unemployed, they could make love on demand. He smiled at the thought of additional lovemaking in his future. Too often when he was on the road, they missed the usual marital interludes. Their cars were paid for, so all that was needed was maintenance. His pickup was older, but in good mechanical shape. Megan's car was only 5 years old, but they had just made the last payments on it and had chosen it because of its low maintenance costs. Megan could put it on her insurance if needed, and if she got pregnant, the baby would be insured as well. As a matter of fact, this whole economic downturn might be the impetus to become a free agent for a while. He smiled as he pulled up to the house, but the car was in the way of him pulling into the garage. He stopped and stared at it for a while. Then it hit him. Their close friends, Mary and Mark Brooks, had traded in their old car a few weeks ago, and Kelly hadn't had time to get used to the new car yet. Since they, or at least Mary, had come to visit, he would have to put Megan's story about losing his job on hold. He got out of the car, grabbed a box of his belongings, and headed for the house. It was early spring here in Missouri, so the temperature stayed at 50 degrees during the day if the sun was shining. But today was a humid day, so he didn't think he'd catch his lovely blonde wife sitting with guests on the back patio. But he was surprised when he didn't see them in the living room or kitchen. There was no basement, as the soil in the area was quite rocky. He was a little worried. He set the box on the table and headed upstairs to the bedroom. At the top of the stairs, he heard soft moans. He trusted Megan so much and was willing to swear to her fidelity that he refused to think of anything bad until he stopped in the doorway of their bedroom. Bad thing number 2 was waiting for him in his own bedroom. In less time than it takes to describe it, a multitude of cluttered thoughts raced through his brain. He remembered meeting Megan at a party thrown by mutual friends 8 or 9 years ago. He had been attracted to her blonde hair, blue eyes, and stunning smile. He was also attracted to the fact that she was lively and outgoing, in contrast to his more quiet demeanor. They became friends and started dating the next night. Both were in their early 20s. They realized that going straight to bed was not the best way to develop a relationship, so they got to know each other well before committing the dirty deed. Now Kelly was watching his former close friend Mark Brooks, a 6-foot-tall, brown-haired man having fun with Megan and Mary. Thoughts were still swirling in his brain. He didn't know what to do. Should he scream and attack, fall to the floor crying, vomit his guts out, turn and run, or do all of the above? That's how he froze in place, but he noticed that Mary didn't look surprised, shocked, or upset that he had caught them. Instead, she smiled at him and raised her hand, inviting him to come closer. He didn't move from his seat. Then Mary rubbed Megan's head. "Kelly's here." That was all she said. His confusion became even more apparent when Megan greeted him. "Hi, honey. We're glad you got here on time." "We're so glad you're here. Mary and Mark and I have been waiting for you to start, but couldn't wait, so we started without you, and now you're joining us." Kelly had a hard time digesting what she had said. What made them believe that he would be coming home so early on this particular day? The last unspoken question made him stagger. As Mark and Megan approached, Kelly backed away from the doorway into the hallway. Megan continued to speak. "This is going to be awesome. Isn't it great?" Finally, stuttering a little, he managed to utter, I, I've got to go. I need to get something. Please." He jerked his hands away from the woman he was about to spend the rest of his life with. "Please wait here while I get something I need." Megan looked up at him. She immediately became anxious. Mark tried to take Kelly's hand, but Kelly pushed him away. "No, wait here. Let me get something. Something I need right now." They would realize later that he never said he was coming back. Kelly retreated to the stairs, turned and walked down to the kitchen. For a few moments he paused, trying to figure out what he should do. Finally, he made his way to the small office off the living room, grabbed his tablet, laptop, chargers, and phone, and then walked out to his pickup truck. He sat in the driver's seat for a few moments before inserting the key into the ignition. He knew that once he started the car, this chapter in his life would be over. His car wasn't quiet, so when he started the engine, he had to be ready to go. There should be no hesitation at all. He rested his head against the steering wheel for a moment before deciding to drive away and give himself time before making final plans. He turned the ignition key, and the engine started immediately. Shifting the transmission into reverse, he looked at the front door and wasn't surprised to see the door immediately swing open, and Megan in her bathrobe run out of it. Kelly didn't slow down or stop. He pulled into the street, put the transmission in drive, and headed away. Glancing in his left mirror, he saw Megan pull into the street, trying to keep him in their former home. He looked ahead again. He couldn't dwell on it right now. He drove aimlessly around the city for a while, then pulled out of it and headed west on the 4-lane highway. "What the hell?" he thought. "I might as well just drive." Behind the wheel, he could put off making any serious decision. But driving didn't stop him from thinking and remembering. He remembered how he felt when he started dating Megan. He felt that she was the one he wanted to be his wife and the mother of his children. They also had great conversations about politics, religion, children, and other current events that were going on at the time. They had so many things in common. Megan had chosen a home for them, even though she knew that Kelly could afford a more luxurious lifestyle. She agreed with him saving as much as possible. Until today, she had never seemed dissatisfied with their life. He couldn't recall a single remark, sign, or act that might have clued him into her behavior today. He'd been driving on autopilot for several hours as he drove west into Kansas. He didn't make any conscious decisions until the low fuel light came on and the alarm roared. He looked around and saw nothing familiar. Christ, he must have traveled a lot farther than he was familiar with. An exit ramp showed up ahead and a sign for a familiar franchise, so he pulled out and headed for the fuel pumps. Unfortunately, he had to make an upfront payment. He didn't want to leave a paper trail behind him at this point, but it worked out this time. Megan wouldn't be able to easily track him from here. He used the card, then went inside and visited the restroom before grabbing a coffee and a snack and heading back to his pickup truck. Since he didn't want Megan tracking him further west, he decided to drive north on the 2-lane highway in the same direction. An hour and a half later, he crossed the Nebraska border and was still traveling north. Somewhere in the northern part of the state, his subconscious apparently took over. He turned left and headed northwest again. At about 4 a.m., the fuel light came on again, and the alarms jingled. He was near a small town and stopped for a break. He had been driving for probably 10 or 12 hours, but he didn't look sleepy, just passed out. He looked around. The town was too small for a convenience store at night. The only traffic seemed to be the railroad and the occasional semi-truck hauling cattle. On the sign, he saw the name Hyannis. For some reason, it seemed familiar, but it had been a long time since he had recognized the name during summer vacations with his parents when he was 12 or 13 years old. They had driven through an area called the Sand Hills in Nebraska. He remembered that although the hills were green then, they seemed stark and lifeless to him. His father had tried to tell him about the area, but he had found it boring at the time. Now he was here again. Why, he didn't know. But somehow he had ended up here. He had turned off the engine as he drove into town, but now it was a little chilly in the steel cab. He started the engine to warm it up, but after a few minutes, there was a loud noise from under the hood, and the air immediately turned cold. The battery indicator light also showed that something was wrong, and he shut the engine off. Bad news number 3. Kelly searched and found an old jacket from last year's hunt in the Ozarks behind the seat. It would keep him warm. Every now and then he got out of the car and walked around. The night was clear and cold. The stars shone in the sky overhead. It was hard to believe it was the same sky he could see from his home in Missouri. If you took away the light pollution, you could see something simply amazing. Despite his jacket and his desire to get outside and get moving, the morning found Kelly shivering in his pickup truck. The sun had risen, and the short streets of the small Nebraska town showed signs of life. Kelly saw a cafe at the end of the block and headed there. Fortunately, it was open to serve breakfast to those who got up early. He ordered coffee and scrambled eggs and ham. The coffee helped him warm up, and the scrambled eggs and ham helped him start a fire. After eating, he asked who could inspect his only possession, his pickup truck. The obliging waitress told him that her boyfriend owned a repair shop and would be happy to inspect his pickup. She made a quick phone call and then directed him across the street to the repair shop. Kelly quickly got to the location and discussed the need for repairs. Soon, a tow truck was sent to pick up the truck. The only problem was that Kelly only had $100 with him. Actually less, because he'd had a snack many hours ago and breakfast this morning. And he didn't want to use a credit card or anything else that might leave a paper trail that Megan could use to track him down, if she cared to look for him at all. He needed space and time to mull over her betrayal and reasons. He would come back and talk to her when he was ready, and not a second sooner. He asked where the bank was and was directed to another block away. There, he talked to the manager for a few minutes, and then sat down at his laptop and connected to the public Wi-Fi. Soon he had transferred some of his money to a new account at the local bank. It should be enough to fix the truck. At this time, he turned on his cell phone. He was in the habit of turning it off when leaving work, as Jerry had a tendency to call and harass his employees at all hours of the day and night. The phone started up, and then the message indicator showed that he had several text messages coming in. A quick check showed that they were mostly from Megan and a few from Mark. A few of the later ones were from his mother. He assumed that Megan had contacted her with some made-up story in hopes that he had contacted her or his father. He quickly replied to his mom that he and Megan had had a falling out and he was taking a vacation to think things over. Kelly also informed his mom that he was fine, but he was stuck far from home. He will call when he can. Kelly then called his lawyer. Since it was a Saturday, he was out of the office, of course. The answering service answered. Kelly left a message for Lawrence Roberts, his attorney. The message said that he and Megan had broken up and that she should not have access to any of his accounts until a judge ruled otherwise. It also wanted Lawrence to move all the money, as much as possible, to offshore accounts. An hour later, Kelly received an email response from Lawrence Roberts. He expressed regret that Megan and Kelly were not together, but promised to honor Kelly's request if it was legal. He knew a couple of financial professionals with the right expertise. Kelly also asked Lawrence to arrange to transfer $2,000 a month from his accounts to Megan's to help with the monthly bills, including the house payment. He wasn't going to live there anymore, but she needed a place to stay. But he had another problem. He assumed Megan would be looking for him. Too much activity in his accounts over the next few days could give her cause to look for him, and his pickup truck was out of commission for those few days. He needed a job that would give him money for expenses, but would also allow him to stay broke for a while. He returned to the diner to eat lunch and consider his options. There was no large town nearby to get lost in. He could camp, but it was still cold at night. Besides, it would take money to make the purchases needed to outfit himself, and the tracks would remain. He could hitchhike away, but he wanted to have his own pickup truck. He didn't feel like buying anything else right now either. Plus, it required moving cash. Now he wished he'd stayed in his hometown for 24 hours and had a substantial amount of cash before he'd snapped out of his seat and made a run for it. Finally, he asked the waitress about the availability of work in Hyannis. She laughed lightly. "Honey, there are only a few businesses here, and there won't be any new jobs in town until the end of spring. If you need a job, go to the ranchers. They always need help." He shrugged. "I don't have any skills they might need, or I'd check it out. Are you sure there's no one hiring here in town?" She shook her head. "Look, Hong, I understand when you find yourself in a predicament. You can be a little out of sorts. I'm really sorry about that. It's just that nothing's going to happen for a few more weeks." She left him to attend to another customer. He sat there pondering his options. Finally, he admitted defeat. If he hitchhiked even to the small town of North Platte, he couldn't lose himself in its population of 25,000. Strangers were strangers and stuck out, but not as much as here in Hyannis. Even if he managed to find some work there, the pay wouldn't be much, and he was sure rent was a real problem, as were other issues like food. He might not be able to afford to go back and get his truck. The waitress, whose name tag said Tiffany, came back and poured him a coffee. "Listen, Tiffany, I've been thinking. Do you think any rancher would hire me until I get back on my feet?" "Well, sugar, you look like you're in decent shape. If you're willing to duck your head and really try, I know some ranches that will give you a chance. The pay there is crap even by my standards, but you'll be sheltered and fed." "I don't know how to ride a horse. I mean, I haven't tried riding since I was a kid, and that was on a ranch in Wyoming, where I'm sure the horses were especially gentle." "Ah, shug. They use pickup trucks and four-wheelers more now. In fact, some ranches don't even have horses." She looked around the small cafe, then smiled and pointed to an obese man at the other end of the room. "Look, that's Bill Blaze. He owns the Circle X bar north of town. Let me see if he needs any help right now. He's due to start calving, and that means a lot of sleepless nights if he doesn't have enough help." Kelly nodded in agreement. As she left to fill Mr. Blaze's coffee mug and have a word with him, Kelly remembered a book she'd read as a teenager. It was a Zane Grey novel called The Ranger Dude, in which a young man from the East came to the wild and woolly West to seek his fortune. Times were much tougher then than they are now, but the dude accepted the challenge, adapted and learned, became a better shot, and eventually earned the respect of the natives of the West. Kelly began to believe that if he tried his best, he could adapt and learn. After all, these were much more modern times now. He just had to keep his wits about him and take on any challenges. He remembered that in the book, the Westerners had tried many tricks, and sometimes outright tried to harm the hero before he had won their respect. He should be prepared to face that kind of thing here too, if he got the job. Tiffany returned and informed him that Mr. Blaze would like to talk to him. Kelly nodded and headed toward the rancher. As he approached him, he tried to get a good look at the man. Bill Blaze was a large man. There was almost 300 pounds of well-fed weight in him at 6 feet tall. His hair had thinned, but was still brown, and his eyes were a piercing brown. He squinted his eyes constantly. Apparently, he didn't believe in sunglasses. "Sit down, young man. Please sit down." Kelly took the proffered seat across from the rancher. For a moment, they sized each other up. Bill Blaze looked to be about 60 years old. He wore simple but serviceable clothes and had an open and honest face. His hands seemed a little arthritic, but were rough and calloused. This was a man accustomed to hard labor. Bill looked at a man in his 30s with sandy-colored hair and blue eyes. He was not tall, 5 feet 9 inches compared to Bill's own height of 72 inches. The stranger wasn't overweight, but he didn't look overly muscular either. The thought flashed across his mind that this must be some kind of city dweller, not someone used to hard physical work. May? He reached across the table and shook the stranger's hand. My name is Bill Blaze, and I own a ranch about 10 miles north of town. What's your name, son? Kelly introduced himself. He had no reason to hide his name. Although Bill was well known in real estate circles, he had no reason to know his name or reputation. Besides, Megan had no idea where to start looking for him if she had the urge. The men talked for a while. Bill told his acquaintance about his ranch, and Kelly simply reported that he had been in the real estate business until the economic downturn forced him to change his residence. Bill nodded at that remark. Yeah, I guess there are good times and bad times, just like ranching. Cattle prices aren't going up now, enough to keep me going, but not enough to keep the banker happy. I have about 15,000 acres on my ranch. We keep the grass in shape by moving herds from one pasture to another. Here in the sandhills, we have great grass and plenty of groundwater in small natural lakes. But if the grass is eaten up too much, it takes years before it recovers and the sand is blown out. We are calving now and expect a good increase in the herd, but it is a lot of work. I have a couple of workers in the house and one in a cabin on another property about 12 miles west of here. Kelly was surprised at the size of the ranch, but Bill waved his hand carelessly, averting an incredulous look. It's not uncommon here in the sandhills. It takes a lot of acres of grass to raise a cow here. We get a lot of rain in the early summer, but it gets scarce in the late summer. It gets pretty dry. I also have extra acres of grass, so I can make hay in the early summer. That way we can feed or top-dress the grass in late summer and all winter long. Bill leaned back in his chair and looked at Kelly appraisingly. Tiff tells me you're looking for work. How do you think you can help me? Kelly knew he had to be honest with this man. I just left my wife in Missouri, finding her in bed with her best friend and her best friend's husband. Somehow, she thought I would just go along with all of this. I need to pay my bills somehow so I don't leave a paper trail while my lawyer works on getting everything straightened out. As for what I can do for you, I'm willing to do anything. I haven't ridden a horse in forever, but I can learn. I follow orders until I learn, and then I can speak my mind. I don't mind physical labor. As a matter of fact, that's just what I need right now. Good physical labor, while I decide what to do with the rest of my life. Bill was a good judge of character. He was also used to people who needed to make lifestyle changes. Every year during the branding season, city folks heard about the roundups and branding, and many of them came to Sandhills to try to take the plunge into ranch life. Of course, they were quite green, but they were willing to do whatever it took. They usually had a great time, with only a few complaining about how hard their lives were. He rose from his chair with an effort, and Kelly stood up as well. Bill held out his hand, and they shook it. Do you need a ride to the ranch, or are you going to make it on hooves? Kelly blushed slightly. My pickup is at the workshop on the next block, so I'm getting there on hooves. Bill chuckled and clapped him on the back. That's all right, son. We'll get you settled in your new place, and then we'll make plans to reunite with your truck when it's fixed. They got out, got into Bill's big four-wheeler truck, and drove to the repair shop for Kelly to pick up his gear. They also stopped at a small farm store so Kelly could buy at least a couple sets of clothes more suitable for manual labor than what he was wearing. Kelly knew the ranch was about 10 miles north of town, but the drive to the house and buildings took a good half hour. The turnoff was 10 miles north of town, but then he turned onto a one-lane asphalt road that ran 5 or 6 miles east of the highway. Bill explained that his ranch was adjacent to the highway, but the ranch house was centrally located. Between the houses were many pickup trucks, tractors with loaders, ATVs, usually called four-wheelers, and a couple UTVs or side-by-side ATVs. There were several barns, one for hay and one for a few cows, a large store, and several small buildings for machinery. The ranch house was a big old two-story house where Bill and his wife Connie lived. They had no children and were in their late 60s. Bill told Kelly that he was going to run the ranch as long as possible and then perhaps sell it and move to a larger town, such as North Platte, when he could no longer physically care for himself and Connie. 100 yards from the main ranch house stood a large two-story house. Bill pointed it out as a bunkhouse. Kelly almost expected it to be a cabin with a large room and an outbuilding in the backyard. Bill laughed when Kelly made his points. Well, I think a lot of people still think we live like the old TV show Green Spaces. It's kind of funny because we have hot and cold running water and have had it for a long time. And with satellite, we can keep up with everything that's going on outside our window and have been doing so for years. They stopped at the cabin and Kelly got his things out. Bill asked if he needed any more clothes. Kelly shrugged and said that would do for now. In a few days, we'll go to North Platte or Alliance for supplies and pick you up some clothes that are suitable for physical labor if you need them. Those big cities have a much larger selection of clothing for every occasion. Kelly only nodded. Any comment now might have seemed demeaning after his words about how rustic he thought the ranch should look. Bill paused before showing him the bungalow. We've never talked about salary. I don't know how much you need to make, but my standard salary is $2,000 a month. You get free lodging and food. There's a fully equipped kitchen, and I keep separate freezers for each person. You will have your own key to keep all the food under guard. Unfortunately, a while back I hired a couple of guys who thought all the snacks and specialties belonged to them, and that caused quite a few problems until we installed individual refrigerators, freezers, and pantries. He paused and showed Kelly his assigned pantry and freezer. You can buy and store soft drinks, alcohol, and everything else here and in that freezer over there. Here are your keys. I provide beef, pork, chicken, and turkey. If you don't know how to cook, there's a computer over there on the counter where you can access any recipe in the world. There's also Wi-Fi here. The password is on the side of the monitor. He led Kelly down the hallway. The first room belongs to David Turney. He likes to be called Butch. Each bedroom has its own bathroom, and the shared one is right here in the hallway. The second room is Terry Loken's. He likes to be called Hoss. I don't really have any reason to do that. And the last room is yours. Kelly was surprised at how spacious the room was. There was a double bed, a dresser, a small desk, and a comfortable chair. A flat-screen TV, DVD player, and satellite box hung on the wall. The bathroom was spacious, with a tub shower and a large enough vanity to store personal items. Kelly tossed his bag on the bed. They returned to the hallway and Bill showed Kelly the linen closet, where extra linens and blankets were stored. Towels and washcloths were also stored there. I assume you'll have your own soap and shampoo, so I won't try to provide any. Kelly nodded. He would have to make do with what he had until he got to town and bought similar personal hygiene items. Leaving home, he certainly hadn't tried to grab them. When he mentioned this to Bill, his new employer snapped his fingers. Say, we can help you. Connie wanted to go to Alliance. It's a larger city out west, about 70 miles from here. She has a sister there, and they have some shopping to do. Why don't you make a list of what you need today, and she'll pick it up and come back here tonight. Kelly quickly wrote a list of his immediate needs and gave it to Bill. Bill then took Kelly to the main house and introduced him to Connie, his wife. Connie was also in her 60s and was a typical mature woman, a matron with a pleasant smile and outlook on life. She also didn't like sunglasses, so she had characteristic wrinkles around her eyes, both from sunny disposition and from squinting in bright sunlight. Her hair was gray and shoulder length. She was friendly and was happy to pick out a few things for Kelly. Bill then introduced Kelly to Butch and Hoss. Since Kelly was originally from Missouri, Butch immediately started calling him Missouri. Kelly quickly decided that Missouri was a more appropriate nickname than Show Me, which would also denote where he was from. Kelly guessed that names weren't necessary for ranch work. He shrugged, and Butch immediately set about teaching him. They took the UTV and headed for the nearest pasture. On the way, Butch explained that most of the herd was put out here for the winter, so the workers could more easily keep an eye on the cows and be ready to help with the calves. He showed Missouri the large round bales of prairie hay that were stored near the pasture. Since the cows were fed early in the morning, they would not be fed until 6 o'clock in the evening. Butch began noting which cows looked fresh and ready to have calves. Every time the men went out to check on them, there were 5 to 10 new calves. It was more dangerous at night, as coyotes would come closer to the herd and try to grab the newborn. The cowboys worked tirelessly to provide maximum protection for the cows and calves. And Butch showed Missouri the rifle they used to restrain the coyotes if necessary. Some ranches send people out to exterminate all the coyotes and other predators like bobcats, but Bill just wants them controlled and kept away from the herd. So the rifle was a .223 caliber, not big enough for deer and other wildlife, but powerful enough for coyotes. They circled the herd a few times and then drove up a low hill so Missouri could fire the rifle a few times. Since he had grown up with guns, his marksmanship was good enough for Butch. Kelly told himself he would apply for a permit and buy a gun the first time he got to a big enough town that had a gun store. It might be Alliance, Ogallala, or even North Platte, but he felt a gun might come in handy when working with the herd. Butch had told him about prairie rattlesnakes, but the weather had still been cold enough lately for them to leave their burrows for the summer. Bites were rare, but still a possibility and something to keep an eye out for. Boots were next on Missouri's list of necessities. On the way back to the ranch, they went back through the herd and found a cow giving birth to a calf. Butch stopped a decent distance away, and Missouri saw the miracle of new life coming into the world. Butch talked about how ranchers and farmers were the first conservationists, and most of them cared about the environment because their livelihood depended on the land and its inhabitants always being healthy. Bill Blaze kept a few horses to keep an eye on the herd and ride the hedges to reduce his carbon footprint. When they traveled to help with haying, they met several ranchers who still stacked hay with horses rather than gas. After the calf was born, Butch made sure his ear matched his mother's ear. He also gave him a quick injection of vitamins and an antibiotic to reduce the chance of pneumonia. The wet and cool weather could have impaired the newborn's ability to fight off disease. They had to keep a close eye on the cow, as she was very protective of her newborn. By moving slowly and talking softly, they were able to put the UTV between them and the cow while they worked. Sometimes the baby is too weak, so we put him in the back of the side-by-side or throw him in the back of the ATV and slowly carry him into the barn. We want his mom to go with him, and once we get the baby into the barn, we dry him off and then get the mom in there to help nurse him. We usually only keep them in the barn for one day before the calf gets strong enough to go outside. This calf looked strong and ready to be with his mom. In fact, he, a young bull calf, immediately scooted on shaky legs around the UTV and started snuggling up to his mom. Butch grinned contentedly and said, "That's what we pay attention to right away. Human or bovine, the need to feed is paramount and shows how strong the baby is." Given his recent difficulties with Megan, Kelly figured he was not destined in the near future to see human mothers and babies interact in this way shortly after birth. He was pleased with what he saw, but saddened by what was ahead of him. Butch kept Kelly busy showing him the various equipment needed for a ranch of this size. There were no machines assigned to each person here. Usually, the selection came down to what was needed and was on hand. That's why there were keys in each car. Butch cautioned Kelly on this point. In the city, you automatically take your keys out and lock your doors, but here you can doom a person to extreme heat, extreme cold, or dampness if you lock them in the car. Even when we get together in large groups, no one takes the keys out of the car. It's not uncommon for someone to just take the nearest pickup truck to go get something they need. We all trust each other to bring everything back in the same condition we left in. Kelly made a mental note to get out of the habit of taking his keys out when he got out of the car. He understood the need to not get overheated or hypothermic. Butch also gave Kelly an extra coat. Someone left some coats and jackets here when they left. You can use whatever you need, especially at night while it's cold outside. We'll be out at 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock to check on the cows. Haas will be out at 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock to do the same thing. We don't expect it to get colder tonight, but there's a chance of rain, and that will make you miserable unless you have something waterproof. He paused. Do you have a hat? Kelly, aka Missouri, shook his head. Butch shook his head incredulously, then rummaged through the closet and found a hanging hat with a 3-inch brim. Here, you might want to wash it before you put it on, but it'll keep you from getting wet tonight. Missouri noticed a full-size washer and dryer in the bungalow and decided to wash the hat, coat, and his current clothes, since that was what he had last worked in. Oh my God, he thought. I got fired yesterday. I drove all night, and today I have a new job. He shook his head in amazement. Butch and Haas showed him how to drive a pickup truck with a flatbed bale lifter. They would drive up to the bale in reverse, grab it with their hands about in the center, and lift it with the hydraulics. Butch laughed and said he remembered having to take small square bales by hand, load them on the trailer, and then drive them to the cows and tear each bale so it could be spread. Now they showed Missouri how they lowered the bale from the back of the pickup truck and then just drove in a circle while the bale rolled behind them and left the hay in the wide cow path. They would drive back and forth until the bale ran out. Then they had to go and get another bale for the bulls. The bulls were kept away from the cows until it was time to start breeding again. Bill had a dozen bulls, and every couple years he would change a few to reduce the chance of inbreeding. He bred exclusively Angus bulls with Angus cows, but occasionally bought a few black white-faced and a few red Angus cows to diversify the herd a bit. However, the bulls always remained Angus. 3 months or so after calving, the bulls were let back into the cows. At the end of the next month, Missouri was taught how to check cows for pregnancy. All non-pregnant cows were loaded and sold. A few heifers from that year's crop were kept for the following year. This continuous process maximized the productivity of the herd by weeding out cows that could no longer produce offspring. Some of them ended up in Blaze's freezers as fresh meat. They were culled from the herd and fed corn for several weeks and then sent to the meat chamber for processing. This would marbleize the meat and make it more tender. Bill would then bring the fresh meat into the house to cure before freezing. Missouri was to learn that this made the meat extremely tender and flavorful. Now, Missouri was overwhelmed with knowledge. This whole process was so different from his previous life that it was like a different world, full of different priorities and morals. These people were gullible to the extreme. It was obvious that it was still very physical work, but everywhere he looked, labor-saving devices were visible. Butch gave him a break and offered to share the food supply until Connie returned from the Alliance. Bill expected her before dark or shortly thereafter, but it depended on how long her visit with her sister lasted. Missouri thanked Butch and then decided to prepare a meal for both of them. He was used to cooking at least 3 or 4 nights a week, depending on Megan's schedule and his own. Now, as he cooked macaroni and cheese, he wondered how often Megan was actually working late or just having fun with her friends, the Brookses. And then a wild thought occurred to him. Were the Brookses really her only lovers? God, what an idiot I am, he thought. After dinner, Butch cleared the table at once, and all the dirty dishes went into the dishwasher, soon to be joined by Haas's. Missouri put the clothes in the dryer, and all 3 of them were done for the day. Missouri retired to his new bedroom and made the bed. He then worked on the latest real estate offer and tried to make some phone calls, but was horrified to find that the signal at the ranch was very weak. The nearest tower was probably located in Hyannis. He went outside, and in the cold evening air, the signal was good enough to make a few calls. An employee of the company he was scouting properties for was incredulous at such a late call, but understood when Kelly explained that he had recently changed jobs. They talked over a few details, after which Kelly hung up the phone and went back inside to warm up. Kelly looked in his phone and found a slew of messages from Megan and missed phone calls. He deleted them all without looking, only noting that she was worried about him. Yeah, right, he said to himself. She just wants to know where I am so she has time to do something. He wasn't ready to deal with her yet. The funds he transferred from his savings account allowed him to make the house payments on time and pay most utilities. Megan could buy her own groceries. Hell, maybe she took this opportunity to put her lovers in the house. They could cohabit and save money that way. The Brooks rented an apartment since Mark had always hated owning a house. He put new requirements into the proposal and then set his alarm clock for 1:30 a.m. He was going to meet Butch at 2 o'clock and Hoss at 5. When he had gained experience in birthing calves, he would start taking turns checking on them day and night. However, Butch wanted him to help pull a few calves first. Missouri found out that sometimes calves had to be pulled when a cow got too tired trying to calve, or when a calf was born early. Sometimes the calf came out feet first. That was the worst-case scenario. It was part of the training to start seeing when a cow was in trouble early enough to help turn the calf before birth to reduce the likelihood of problems. Older cows tended to have fewer birth complications, except maybe uterine prolapse. UTV had a kit to surgically repair such problems. Such a cow could subsequently be culled from the herd. As luck would have it, that night Missouri happened to be helping Butch pull the first calf out. It was unreal. The shadows caused by the cow were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Butch had a headlamp, and Missouri only had a flashlight, and he couldn't hold on to it and the calf puller at the same time. The cable had to be wrapped around the calf's hips to reduce the strain on the limb. Butch informed him that it is not uncommon to dislocate a hip or even tear a leg off. Care had to be taken. This was difficult to do as the cow would not budge. This night they were lucky. The calf stretched straight and true and was soon standing and trying to reach its mother. The cow rose to her feet and ate her purges, that is, the placenta and umbilical cord, and Butch directed Missouri to tag and vaccinate the newborn. They found a couple more newborns and, moving quickly between mom and calf, tagged and vaccinated them. They returned to the house and handed the UTV to Hoss to get ready for their first outing on this cold but dry night. Missouri fell into bed and slept like a log until 0430 when his next alarm clock rang. He dragged himself out of bed and wrapped himself up again. It was about 30 degrees outside, and a brisk breeze was blowing. He was about to learn that the people of Sandhills didn't give a second thought to the wind unless its speed exceeded 20 miles per hour. Anything less than that was just a breeze. Straight-line winds sometimes reached gale force of 60 to 70 miles per hour. Spring was tornado season, and the early warning system didn't work too well in this sparsely populated area. Hoss and he pulled another calf. This one hadn't been born yet. They picked it up along with the placenta and took it to the house for disposal. The yapping of coyotes could be heard in the distance. They slept for a couple hours, then quickly made breakfast, fed the cows, and checked again to see if the calf had been born. This continued for the rest of the month until almost every cow had her calf. The days became a little milder, the rains came, and the grass turned green. Now the horseback riding began. In Missouri, they learned how to saddle a horse and then mount it. Most of the horses were well trained enough not to buck, but a couple of them galloped around and tried to show the rider who was boss. He hit the ground hard a couple of times, but soon realized he had to climb right back up. He learned how to tighten the girth so that the horse could breathe, but still keep the saddle on. He also learned not to put the toe of his boot in the stirrup so that if he fell off the horse, his feet could be freed. Dying from drugs on an out-of-control horse was not something he wanted to do. Each day they fed the cows, then got in their saddles and rode around the hedges looking for sagging or broken barbed wire. Since the cows had not yet been put out to big pasture, he would mark the breakages, and they would return in a pickup truck or UTV to patch holes, replace a post, or install new wire destroyed by winter's cold and wind. Heavy snowfall would also cause the hedge to be lost, and then repairs were needed. When time allowed, Butch and Hoss worked with Missouri to develop his galloping skills. It was a long process. First, Missouri needed to do a real loop in his lariat. He kept wanting to do an 8. Butch told him that if they had horned animals, a figure 8 might work, but Angus calves don't have horns, so a regular loop was needed. He practiced making a loop and then putting it behind his head. By the end of April, the hedges were looking good and strong again, ready to let the cows and calves out. Missouri was getting better and better at roping, but it was decided that he would be better suited to throwing the calves rather than trying to harness them when it came time to brand them. On their ranch, the branding was to take place in the middle of May. They had to go to other ranches first and help with branding there. Missouri's pickup had been fixed, but he decided to leave it in town for now. It wasn't needed at the ranch, and it could be stored in town for when it was needed. Just then, Bill came in and asked to speak to Missouri alone. Kelly, I wanted to tell you that your wife will soon know where you are. The state patrol spotted your pickup in town and started asking questions. Apparently, someone in your family, presumably your wife, reported you missing. There's a new initiative, something like an Amber Alert, for adults to check on their whereabouts and notify their families. Kelly merely nodded his head in understanding. As much as he hated to think about it, his old life was about to jump up and bite him in the ass. Patrol is checking people in the area. Since you haven't tried to hide who you are, they're not knocking on my door yet, but they'll be here soon to check on you. You don't need to leave or change anything, but I'm curious to know why you're here and not socializing with any of your family. Kelly started cautiously and then spoke more confidently, talking about his former job, his wife, his lifestyle and outlook on life, and then her betrayal. Look at it from my perspective. I had just been laid off from a job I loved because I had savings and was living within my means. I put my desk in order and went home to try to get a grip on myself and decide how I was going to proceed. I had a lot of clients who would probably use me as a freelancer, or I could start my own business. But did I want to do that now, in this economic situation? Then I walk into my house and find out that my wife is not only a whore, but is also bisexual and wants me to join her immediately. I just had to leave before I lost everything. God only knows what might have happened if I had stayed. He raised his eyes to his boss. Bill had the expression of a concerned parent on his face. It was full of compassion. Kelly continued. That first day after escaping their clutches, I drove around town, but I couldn't think of anything in particular. Everything was a mess. My boss couldn't have ruined my world any better if he had planned it. In the end, I probably just pulled onto the highway heading west and drove on. If I was moving, I didn't have to stop and feel. I could just keep moving away from the problem. When I figure out what to do, I can go back and deal with the whole mess. But I still don't know what to do. I have some savings. My lawyer talked a good man into moving most of them into offshore accounts where my wife can't get to them. Infidelity is no longer a valid reason to divorce and keep most of the money I've accumulated over the years. She'll get at least half, and I don't want her profiting from her shitty behavior. Kelly took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. Tears stood in his eyes. He stared off into space somewhere. This place and this job were a godsend. I almost wish I could pay you for the therapy you and the boys have provided me. This ranch job is the best therapy I could have ever imagined. I am learning a whole new way of life, and I feel better than I have in years. I sleep soundly at night because I'm tired physically, not mentally. He shook his head. I know I can't hide from her forever, but I wish it could last longer. I'm actually surprised she's even looking for me. She has a house, a job, lovers, just not me. All in all, there's no good reason for her to be looking for me, unless she needs the savings. The cars are already paid off and the house is almost paid off. I've instructed my attorney to transfer $2,000 a month into her account to support her lifestyle. She doesn't need me at all. Bill then leaned forward. What's your plan if she shows up here? Sure, I can arrest her for trespassing, but shouldn't you talk to her and tell her it's over if that's the case? Kelly shrugged. I don't know yet. I haven't decided yet. In the evenings, before I go to bed, I sit and try to decide what to do. I know this is a temporary job, not a career. I don't see myself as a rancher. Perhaps I will be an investor in the right venture, but not an owner-manager. I really don't know what my future looks like, other than lonely and bleak. He took a deep breath and let it out as a sigh. I can't talk to her right now. Someday, yes, I'll be ready to talk, but not now. Bill nodded his head. Okay, here's how I'll proceed. The patrol will show up in a couple days to talk to you. They don't know in town where you went, but they assume you're still in the area. We have a tight-knit community, and you have been welcomed. Believe it or not, there has been a lot of speculation about your story. After all, you arrived in your pickup truck with Missouri license plates, ate at a cafe, and then disappeared, except for the pickup truck. Butch and Haas don't know much about you and probably don't even remember your real name. If they do talk, it's about Missouri, not Kelly. Most people will put two and two together, but they won't give the information to the cops except the sheriff, and he doesn't care as long as the laws aren't broken. He leaned back in his chair again. If anyone from your past shows up, I'll try to warn you over the radio. You know the business band radio works just about anywhere on the ranch. It will be up to you how fast you react. Kelly thanked Bill and returned to his duties. As the sun rose in the east, a few days later, a lone state patrolman showed up at the ranch. Bill called Kelly and asked him to come to the ranch house to talk. Kelly met the patrolman and assured him that he was fine. The patrolman lectured Kelly on the need to inform his family of his whereabouts so that they would not worry or involve law enforcement. Kelly managed not to smile as he assured the patrolman that he would take care of that oversight. Missouri proceeded to formulate a plan. His pickup truck would be watched, of that he was sure. He didn't want to see Megan right now. A rare thought occurred to him. What if she brought Mark and Mary with her? There was no way he was going to talk to her in the presence of those assholes. Where to go and how to do it was what he was thinking about. He could buy a new car if he wanted to, but as soon as he registered it, someone would start tracking it. He went back to Bill, and after laying out his plan for the near future, arranged a couple things with him. Bill was surprised, but then smiled and agreed. The highlights were then discussed. Kelly used some money from his personal account, which had been set up after he left home, to order merchandise. After about a week, the brown truck began to stop by the ranch on a regular basis. A small pile accumulated in Missouri's room. Each evening, Missouri went through the latest shipment and repacked the bags he had purchased. He obtained a gun permit and, taking advantage of a rare trip to the Alliance, bought a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol and several hundred rounds of ammunition for it. He also purchased a .223 caliber rifle and a coyote scabbard. A couple hundred rounds of ammunition for it he also added to the total stockpile. They proceeded to branding. It was hot, dirty, smoky, and smelly work. Skillful hands led the calves out of the herd on ropes and dragged them to the brigade, dropping them on the ground. There were 2 men for each calf. One would grab the calf and throw it on its side, then kneel on its neck and hold it by its front hooves. The other, usually Missouri, would grab one hind leg and pull it back while pushing the other hind leg forward with his foot. This helped keep the calf still, while additional hormones and antibiotics were administered and then branded on the right side. If it was a young bull, it was castrated and turned into a steer, and then released into the herd. At the beginning of the day, the calves were separated from the cows. The cows were roaring in another pen, and the calves were calling for their moms. After a lunch break provided by the ranchers' wives, work continued throughout the afternoon. On several of the larger ranches, the entire group would be moved to another herd, and the process would start all over again. Missouri would sleep on the way back to Round Bar X, and then eat a light dinner before showering and throwing clothes in the washing machine. He didn't think about Megan or any of his otherworldly problems before falling into a deep sleep, and didn't wake up until just before dawn to head to the next ranch and repeat the day. There were calves that fought and kicked. Their hooves hurt and caused severe bruises. More than one man was limping by the end of the day. Missouri took comfort in the fact that he was not the only one suffering. Sometimes they would find a steer or heifer that they hadn't noticed before. They were not thrown on the ground. A portable cradle was used for that purpose, into which the offending one was shoved. The sides compressed the beef, and the head was fixed in the gate so that the animal could not move. The appropriate bar could be slid down and out of the way to ensure branding, and then the animal was released. Some ranches wanted to use calf cradles to hold the calves, but the branding process was slowed down, so in most cases, the calves were simply tied with a rope and tossed. As they moved from ranch to ranch, the calves got bigger and bigger. They added weight every day as they grew. It took more and more agility and strength to throw a calf. Missouri didn't realize it, but each day he grew stronger from the weight of his work. He became slimmer, but more muscular. His hat had been changed to an 8-inch hat to shade his face as best as possible. but he was still growing swarthier. Some of his arms were smeared with sunscreen, but it came off quickly. Finally, the branding was over. All hands took a couple days to rest and recuperate. It was time for haymaking. All the tractors, sickle mowers, windrowers, rakes, balers, and loaders were ready to go. The mowers and windrowers were started as soon as the dew came off the hay. If a mower was used, a rake was brought in a day later and the hay was raked. The windrower would leave the hay in the windrow, but sometimes the windrow had to be turned over if the hay got wet and didn't have time to fully cure, so a rake was used to turn the windrow. Again, it was hot, dusty, dry work. The old adage about making hay while the sun shines is not a false statement. Some tractors had air-conditioned cabs, but most were old but serviceable open-platform tractors with no modern conveniences. Seniors were hired to help operate the mowers and rakes. Older people ran windrows, balers, and loaders. Some of the hay was put into big stacks, and some was baled into big bales. It all depended on the rancher and his preference. Missouri started out with school children on a tractor with a sickle mower. Then he learned to use a 20-foot wide rake to pick up loose hay and move it to the center into a nice windrow for the baler to pick up and turn into tight 2-ton bales with plastic sheeting to protect the hay. Soon the meadows were dotted with large round bales. On a few ranches, the bales were large square bales, which the owners affectionately called loaves. These were easier to stack than the round bales, but they were all to be carried later to the bale yards where they would be useful for the coming winter. It was hard to think that, wiping sweat from pounds of water every day, this was the work of preparing for winter. One evening, back at the ranch, Bill went into the bunker to talk to Missouri. Connie had visitors today. This was the bombshell Missouri had been waiting for. My place? Bill nodded. How many came? Bill held up his fingers. 3, 2 women and a man. Only one introduced herself. She claims to be your wife and wants us to bring you here immediately. Connie informed her that you are working on another ranch today and won't be back until a couple days later. She figured your wife wouldn't wonder about your lodging for the night. He stopped and looked intently at Missouri. Are you going to carry out your plans? Missouri nodded. Yes, I think I will be able to leave your land before she returns. If she doesn't know which direction I'm going, she'll assume I've gone to get my pickup and will follow me there. With any luck, I'll be gone long enough for her to come home and leave me alone. Bill picked up on his comment. You mean her house or your house? Missouri smiled a slightly sad smile. It was my home until today. I guess I fit the definition of homeless now. It's still a couple hours until dawn, so I should get going. He shook hands with his boss, whom he could also call a friend. He said nothing to Butch or Hoss. Bill would take care of it tomorrow. He quickly unmade his bed and threw the linens into the washing machine. With only toiletries left in his bags, he was ready to leave. He turned off his cell phone as there would be no signal for quite some time. Then he went to the corral and dealt with the 2 horses he had bought from Bill. One he saddled and only put a halter on the other. He led both to the bungalow and tied them to a tree. Butch came out on the porch as Missouri put a pack saddle on the second horse and then began to lift the trunks into place. Going somewhere, Missouri? Missouri continued packing. Yeah, we'll have to see what's over the horizon. It's been a while, but it's time to hit the road. I'm lingering here. Bill will explain in the morning why I have to leave so suddenly. Butch nodded. It's a woman, isn't it? Missouri nodded. I was wondering. You never wanted to go into town on Saturday nights and howl a little. There aren't many available women in this neck of the woods, but everyone notices if someone isn't chasing what they have. No one thought you were gay, so we figured some woman had done something bad to you and you were still hurting. Missouri nodded again. I'm just not ready to deal with her. Bill said she showed up here today, so it's time to leave. When I decide what to do, I'll talk to her. Until then, I'll just keep moving. Since you're on horseback, what direction are you headed? Do you think she's following your truck? I don't know what direction I'm headed myself. If you don't know, you can't tell if she comes and asks. And yes, I think she's following my truck. I'll come back and get it later. Missouri finished packing. He adjusted his hat and, putting his rifle in its scabbard, climbed into the saddle. His .45 caliber pistol rested in a small holster on his back. The sun was beginning to set in the west, and the shadows were lengthening. He nodded to Butch, turned, and headed north. Missouri got the idea of horseback riding from an old Zane Grey novel where a 1930s modern cowboy traveled from Hollywood, where his horse was the star of the movies, to Wyoming. Even then, seeing someone on horseback was rare, but you could ride for days and not meet anyone. Missouri wasn't going to get as far as Gray's hero, but he could stay off the highways and roads so Megan wouldn't get upset about not being able to find him again right away. His supplies included a bedding and sleeping bag, a small dome tent in case of inclement weather, freeze-dried food, jerky, water and extra jugs, a change of clothes, and personal items. A laptop, cell phone, and tablet were well packed. He had a solar charger for his electronics in case he decided to stay a day. There wasn't enough firewood in the sandhills, so he planned to use an old pioneer trick of burning dry cow dung, or cow cakes, for heat and cooking. There were many small lakes in the valleys, so he could replenish his water supply anywhere. In a week, he could be 100 miles from home and not see a single person if he wished. To the north was South Dakota, and to the west was Wyoming. South and east were closer to more populated areas, so he wasn't going to be traveling in those directions for a while. He planned to make a wide loop around Circle Bar H. The storage fee was deposited in his pickup for the long haul, and he could send deposit money via email whenever he found himself at the public library, where Wi-Fi was always free. That first evening, he only traveled about 5 miles or so before stopping for the night. Using a small camp stove, he quickly warmed up a meal and then wrapped himself in his earthy clothes and fell asleep. At first light, he got out of bed, checked the horses and moved them to another pasture, then brewed some coffee and had a quick breakfast. After eating, he regathered the animals and was soon on his way. Figuring that Megan, if she looked hard for him, would know he had headed north, he traveled north a couple more miles and then headed west. He was still on the land of the Circle of Bar X. As always, he kept a close eye on the shooting range conditions and any fences that came his way. He could always let Bill know of any potential problems he encountered. After several months of familiarizing himself with the land, he was confident of his location. At first, the hills seemed the same. It was worth going up to a slight elevation, and the next hill looked exactly the same. There were many stories of ranchers and their offspring getting lost on their properties. Most uneducated people would have laughed at it, but knowledgeable people would have only sighed and thought about how they had been turned loose on land they knew well. Missouri knew that if he continued west, he would take the highway and end up at the edge of Circle X. If there was a gate there, he would use it. Otherwise, he would take the fence tongs with him, lower the fence and move the horses over it, then put the fence back up. The second night found him 20 miles west of the highway at the Lazy K site. It was one of the places Missouri had helped with branding and haying, so he kind of knew the land. He camped again, but this time by a small lake. Since there was a swamp around the lake, he stayed away from the land and just went to the lake to get water. It was so clean that it didn't need purification. Transparent and pleasant to taste. True, he had to beware of alkaline lakes, as they were not uncommon in these parts. Thus passed his days and nights. For a day, he would lay his horses under old trees to rest, and on other days, he would walk 15 or 20 miles. Every evening, he would podder the horses and examine their hooves to make sure one or the other was not lame. After a week's journey, he spotted a ranch house and rode up to it. As he entered the yard, the rancher came out of the house and called out, "Light it up, stranger." The man began to chuckle as Missouri did so. "It's been 50 or 60 years, I guess, since I've had cause to say that. It's just that nobody around here rides horses any more than they have to anymore." He looked at Missouri. "I got a call the other day from an old friend, Bill Blaze, from the Circle X Bar. Said there might be a hobo showing up who needs a job for a while. Are you the guy named Missouri?" Missouri nodded. The old man, who was at least 70, if not a day older, held out his hand. "My name is Ronnie Bentley. This is Double B." I've recovered a bit from arthritis and can do a little work on my new arm. Are you interested? Missouri was still reeling from the fact that this man knew who he was. The look on his face must have indicated his confusion. Son, you may be miles away from the Circle X bar, but in this sparsely populated neighborhood, we all know each other, if not personally, then by reputation. There isn't a single person here who rides with a pack horse except a man named Missouri. Bill said he called everyone he could within a 100-mile radius of his house to let them know that this guy named Missouri might call. He vouched for you and said we'd get him in trouble if he found out someone had hurt his man. I guess we've all been waiting for you to drop in on us, if only for a little while. Missouri shook his head and thanked his new friend. That's all right. Put your horses in the corral after you take care of them and come up to the house. Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. Missouri did so. Upon entering the house, he was introduced to Millie Bentley, who immediately showed him to the bathroom so that he could clean himself up. After a hearty dinner, she showed him towels and napkins so he could shower and feel more civilized. They tucked him in the guest bedroom for the night and went to bed themselves. Missouri was up at dawn, as usual. Ronnie was already on his feet and moving around, albeit slowly, since his arthritis prevented him from moving quickly. Soon Millie had breakfast ready on the table. After eating, Ronnie took Missouri on a tour of his home. Double B's was only 8,000 acres compared to Circle Bar X's 15,000 acres, but it was still large enough to require a couple of laborers to do the work. Missouri helped mend the hedges and then move large round bales from the meadow. He worked there for a week before he got some bad news. Arriving from work, Ronnie met him at the yard gate, hot and sweaty from the summer sun. There were some people here the other day, said they were looking for some guy named Kelly Free. I told them I didn't know the name or who they were looking for. I don't think they believed me. Missouri shook his hand. Thanks, Ronnie. I think I'll pack up in the morning and hit the road. They didn't say when they'd be back? They said they were checking north, so they might be heading south and then east again. They think this guy is hitchhiking to different ranches. One woman seemed to really want to talk to this Kelly guy. I guess she did, but I don't know why. Seems like she just needs to get on with her life. Missouri turned and went to the barn where his horses and reins were stored. He slept in the guest room, so he only took a change of clothes and toiletries into the house each day. Since he had been on the trail, he had developed a mustache and beard. At Double B's, he shaved his neck so it wouldn't itch as much, but left the beard and mustache. He used their internet to make sure his pickup was still safe and sent some letters to Bill Blaze, thanking him for letting his neighbors know about Missouri's travels. He also sent letters to his parents, letting them know he was okay, but where he was unknown. The next morning, he had a hearty breakfast and began to pack. He paused briefly to order some items, particularly food, to be delivered to the address in Gordon, Nebraska that Ronnie had given him. He estimated that the drive to Gordon would take a week. It would be his first foray into the city since he had left Round Bar X. It rained all day after leaving Double B's. Missouri put on his raincoat and, after making sure it was pulled over his eyes, continued riding. The horses didn't seem to mind, and his backpacks were waterproof. By the end of the day, he had probably only traveled 5 miles, as the horses didn't want to go fast in the rain. He found an old abandoned barn and was able to get himself and the horses inside. It was lucky that he was able to do this, for after they were under shelter, a thunderstorm started. Missouri busied himself with his horses again, and then he heated up some stew and ate a hot supper. He hung his wet clothes on a makeshift rack and then wrapped himself in his earth clothes again. It was too hot for a sleeping bag. The next day dawned bright and clear, so he had time to get a good night's rest. At the end of the week, he found himself outside of Gordon. It was a small town of about 1,600 people, but all the stores were centered in it. Missouri spurred his horses by a small creek on the outskirts of town and then headed into the business district. He went into a small store, bought some canned goods, and allowed himself a rare Coca-Cola. It was cold and refreshing. Returning to the horses, he packed the canned goods in his bag and went to the address Ronnie had given him. There, he met the owner of the house and picked up his supplies. Returning to the horses, he packed those supplies as well. He went to the library for the last time for the day, where he spent a few hours researching current events and using the public internet to send a few emails. The lawyer wanted to let him know that Megan was calling him daily to get information. Lawrence also informed him that Megan had never once mentioned the divorce in correspondence or conversations with him. His parents were supportive, but wanted him to come home. He sent them a reply saying that he was recovering and would be in touch with them again soon. He checked the local news in his hometown and found that property management services had closed its doors. He was far enough away from it that he didn't feel any satisfaction at the failure of the business. Overall, he was just sad that so many people had lost their jobs. He decided to get some refreshment then, and headed to a local cafe he passed by on his trips into town. Once inside, he sat down in a booth at the side of the room and was soon brought an iced tea and a hot roast beef sandwich. Everything was going smoothly when he turned his attention to the conversation in the booth behind him. The high backs of the chairs prevented people from sitting and seeing who was around them, and that usually allowed for privacy while eating. But two people, at least Missouri could only hear two voices, reached him. These two must not have bothered with privacy. He didn't know how long they had been sitting there, but he recognized Megan's voice immediately. He's here somewhere, close. I can feel him. I've always felt when he's around. I just hope he'll stop and talk to me so I can explain what we mean to each other. I have to make him believe me. End of part 1. Part the second of maybe coming out in 12 hours. Write in the comments if you're waiting for it. Also give a like under this video and subscribe to my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video.